Thank you. We are going to go right into the second panel, which is also comprised of two philosophers. So we'll have a chance to continue with the line of discussion opened up by our excellent presentation from Dr. Alex Ramos. Before we begin, my name is Margarita Mooney Clayton. I'm a professor in the Department of Practical Theology at the Princeton Theological Seminary, where I teach, amongst other things, on art and Christian education. And I'm also the founder and executive director of the Scala Foundation, which is a co-sponsor for this event. It has been a great pleasure to work with Chris Gray and the Margaret Beaufort Institute and Father Dominic White on the planning of this event. I'm grateful to both of them for their vision and hard work. I will say that Father Dominic White has surpassed my expectations in terms of not only his vision, but his energy for every single detail of this event. The tech, the music, the hospitality, which he mentioned, and his passion for launching the center here at the Blackfriars Hall. I am personally grateful to Father John O'Connor, who is with us in the audience, Father Richard Finn, who is not here with us, but who invited me here during my sabbatical from Princeton Theological Seminary to become a fellow at the Las Casas Institute of Blackfriars. I'm also grateful. I see we have in the audience Father Michael Lloyd from Wycliffe Hall, who has graciously hosted many of our speakers. So thank you, and thank you for the work that I know you are also doing on art and theology at Wycliffe. The Scala Foundation wanted to acknowledge some of its recurring donors who have sponsored events like this in the past in Princeton, and who also generously contributed to this event. They're listed on your program, but I wanted to point out that it includes support from the Institute of Human Ecology at the Catholic University of America, from the Apgar Foundation, the Bruderhof community, and the Jacques Maritain Center at the University of Notre Dame all contributed to this event, as well as Mr. Richard Tucker, Mr. John Hearn, and Mr. Duncan Thomas. So we thank them all for their generous support. Now I have the pleasure of introducing to you our two panelists for this. I will begin with Father Brad Elliott. He is a professor of moral theology at the Dominican School of Philosophy and Theology in Berkeley, California. Prior to that, he studied at the Cincinnati Conservatory, is that right? Mm-hmm. Classical music as well as jazz music. In his final year in college, he became a Roman Catholic, moved to Los Angeles, where he was a performing and touring jazz musician, and from a career in entertainment, found his way into the Western Province Dominicans. And somewhere along the way, met my husband before me, and then celebrated our wedding. So thank you, Father. But I will also say he recently defended his PhD thesis at the Catholic University of America. And the book upon which his talk today is based is for sale in the back. So wonderful to have you here, Father Brad. And he's also a board member of the Scala Foundation. Jan Bentz, I met here during my visit to Blackfriars. He teaches in philosophy here at the Studium at Blackfriars. He teaches on theological aesthetics, amongst other things. And if I'm correct, he's focusing his presentation today on two French philosophers, Maritain and Gilson. But let me tell you, if you ever want somebody to give you a fantastic lecture on German philosophy, I have not met someone better than Jan Bentz, who can tell me not only what Kant and Hegel and all those other Germans said, but how what they said has shaped the very contours of all of modern philosophy, and including much theology and contemporary discourse on the self, on ethics, on immanence, and these incredible concepts. So he's focusing on the French today, but do ask Jan when you can for his insights on German philosophy. He is German. These two have met each other before because Jan also has a sort of second career as a journalist, and he writes articles. He tries to spread broad knowledge within the intellectual and church communities on these very important issues on philosophy, theology, and the art. And so if you Google later on Brad Elliott and Jan Bentz, you will actually see an interview between the two of them on this very topic. So thank you, welcome, and we shall begin with whoever which of you wishes to begin.
I'll be here. Thank you. Lists differ among themselves, but the classical philosophers numbered 5 virtues seated in the intellect that perfect the intellect in its proper activity. 3 of these virtues perfect the speculative intellect in its operation of knowing the world, understanding, knowledge, and wisdom. The activity of knowing first principles, the activity of drawing conclusions from those principles through a type of discursive reasoning, or the activity of knowing the first cause of all things. But the last 2 intellectual virtues listed do not perfect the intellect's activity of knowing, but its activity of applying reason to various things. The virtue of prudence perfects the intellect in applying right reason to human action, saturating practical action with a share of right reason ordered to an end. But lastly, the virtue of art perfects the intellect in applying right reason, not to human action, but to things made, saturating external things made with a share of that reason and order. As a result of this, prudence, or phronesis, is called recta ratio agibilium, or right reason of things to be done. And art, or techne, is called recta ratio factibilium, or right reason of things to be made. Thus, the human mind engages the order of the cosmos through activity flowing in 2 directions. This is key. Speculative activity reads, so to speak, the ordered reason of the cosmos and brings that reason inside. Practical activity, then, in a sense, applies that reason back into the world by placing ordered reason either directly into human action or into external things made. Now, labeling these 5 intellectual activities as virtues was a bold philosophical move. It's very bold. This means that these come preloaded with a particular ratio all their own, and that each one, qua virtue, must obey a type of rule or measure of its activity. That's key. The human mind is not its own measure, as if it were its own creator. Rather, the mind in all its activity must be measured by another. It must follow a type of mean. Speculative reason is measured by the world that it knows. Truth exists in the mind, as St. Thomas famously teaches, when an adequatio, or equality, exists between mind and thing known. If a likeness of the thing in the mind does not equate to that same thing in reality, no truth exists in the mind. The created world, then, is the measure of the mind's knowing. And if this is true for speculative reason, it was no great leap for philosophers to assume that the same applied also for practical reason as well, although certainly not as intuitive. Practical reason must also obey a type of measure in the natural world. The natural world becomes a model or archetype of right practical reason that holds that practical reason to account. Just as the natural world measures the mind's knowing, so also does the ordered and goal-directed pattern of nature measure human action as well. Nature provides a pattern that speaks to the mind with a type of command, an ought, that thrusts human activity towards a good goal. This is the origin of the very idea of a natural law, or a type of ordered reason in nature imposing a measure upon practical reason, giving meaning and order to practical reason's activity. The mind simply sees that good ought to be done and evil ought to be avoided. The mind simply sees that one ought to know the truth and live in society, know the truth about God. One simply sees that one ought to preserve himself and being, a species. There is a goodness to the order of nature impressing meaning upon human action, ordering it towards an end. And again, if this were true of reason applied to human action, rector ratio agibilium, it was again no great leap for classical thinkers to assume that the same applied for human making, rector ratio factibilium, or art. Human artistic reason has a type of measure in the natural order. For art too, the natural world becomes a model or archetype for practical reason's making. The ordered and goal-directed pattern of the natural world measures, so to speak, human art. Now, this provides the foundation of the classical notion that, quote, art is an imitation of nature, end quote. Nature's ordered patterns speak to the mind with a type of command, calling to be imitated, actually demanding to be imitated, and thus thrusting human art towards a good goal. Yet in spite of this, the notion of art as an imitation of nature has not gone unchallenged in the modern world, needless to say. Perhaps a type of craft or art of utility, the making of useful goods, may be called an imitation of nature, some might say. But the arts of the beautiful, as Gilson would call them, the fine arts, or art for beauty's sake, these arts and the creativity they inspire could never be tethered to a mere imitation of natural patterns. Such an objection assumes that the creative artist's imitation of any pattern or beauty other than its own naked creative intuition or raw imagination would necessarily be a limitation, not a liberation. But I believe this would be a mistake. Why? The creative artist must be a servant of a beauty, of a beauty that's not his own, not a creator of beauty. Beauty is a reality that exists before the artist. It will exist after the artist. It is greater than the artist. And because of this, the artist must serve and participate in a beauty greater and more primordial than himself. If the creative artist were to assume that his intuitive imagination held the position of creator, ex nihilo, of a beauty emerging solely within himself and not given to him by another, not only would he place himself in a position of a type of solitary God, but he would also, by that very fact, isolate himself from all others capable of participating in that same beautiful order. Beauty is a transcendent good. It can never be a solitary good. Beauty is not only a type of spiritual good, capable of enjoyment by many at once without diminution or depletion, but beauty is even more a shared good, a type of spiritual good capable of uniting all those who do in fact see it and enjoy it. Beauty must be a true common good, a good that is not only shareable by many, but a good that unites those who share it, a good with the power to, quote, create community, end quote. In other words, beauty is a common good, not because it may first be shared in common, but because it has the power to unite into one community, those who see it and share it. Now, due to this deeper truth, to the reality of beauty, classical thought, certainly classical Christian thought, recognized that the creative artist possesses a type of vocation, a calling to be of service to a reality greater than himself or herself. The creative artist then possesses a great responsibility. He could never be accountable to nothing other than himself. Rather, he is accountable to another who is beauty himself, another whose own beauty is infinitely shareable without depletion. Thus, before the creative artist learns to create beauty, the creative artist must first learn to be a reader of beauty. That's key. The creative artist must first learn to receive it. The artist must first learn to see before he can make. So this leads to a question. From where, then, might the artist learn to read a beauty greater than himself, existing before himself, and indeed a beauty that is common to all? Well, for classical thought, the answer was simple. The created world, first coming from the all-wise and good hand of God, herself provides a pattern or ratio or model of beauty that bespeaks of a type of divine order. Nature speaks of a divine beauty, a divine order, ever ancient, ever new, connecting the artist's mind to a beauty in which all creatures participate. Nature is like a proxy for an ordered reason, calling all who read it beyond themselves into a unified and unifying good with the power to unite all. Only art as an imitation of nature possesses the power to connect the mind of the artist to an ordered beauty greater than himself, and most of all, connect his creative intuition to a beauty that is even readable by others. But we must give the modern objection credit where credit is due. It would certainly be a mistake to envision an artistic imitation of nature's order as a simple artistic replication or representation of a nature already given. Far from it. Far from it. Instead, like a prophetic vocation, the artist must read the manifold aspects of ordered beauty in the cosmos and augment as explicit that harmony and clarity only implicitly present. The artist must amplify the form, proportion, and clarity within nature to bring others to an experience of a beauty they could otherwise not see. The artist is truly a type of prophet. Thus, the artist, rather than a creator of raw beauty through his own creative intuition, is like a messenger of beauty, bringing its message to those who need it. In thinking this way, we recover an understanding of art as a participation in God's own governance of the cosmos, governance of the world. And once art breaks from its connection to this cosmological view, it becomes at best solipsistic, isolating, and self-absorbed, and at worst, it may descend into a decomposition of order and a destruction of the very image of God in the creature. The creature becomes a mere narcissist, obsessed with its own creation ex nihilo. And here's the key. The artistic mind is not its own measure. But the human person, as created in the image of God, is in a sense a measured measurer or a ruled ruler, participating in an ordered beauty that it receives, an ordered beauty for whom the artist is a messenger. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Margarita, for the wonderful introduction. I feel quite humbled speaking as Professor Ramos and Brad Elliott, who is a soundbite spitter, as we would call him, in journalistic jargon. And there's a little bit of irony now, having been presented as a German who knows not about Germans, because the section that I cut out yesterday to shorten the paper was a section on Kant. But you can talk to me about that in a break, I guess. So I think I can just maybe add some accents to what has been already so amply presented and beautifully already stated. Quote, "For not by art do they utter these things, but by divine influence, since they had fully learned by art to speak on one kind of theme, they would know how to speak on all. And for this reason, God takes away the mind of these men and uses them as his ministers, just as does soothsayers, and godly seers, in order that we who hear them may know that it is not they who utter these words of great price when they are out of their wits, but that it is God himself who speaks and addresses us through them. End quote. In the Ion, Plato stages this powerful confrontation, and in fact a powerful confrontation between two ways of understanding artistic excellence: rational skill and divine intuition. Through the probing question of Socrates, the dialogue dismantles the idea that the rhapsode Ion possesses a systematic craft, a techne, in his resuscitation of Homer. Instead, Socrates insists that Ion has an apparent mastery stems not from knowledge or method, but from divine inspiration. He is, in effect, a passive conduit of the muses. Like a magnetic chain linking the poet, the performer, and the audience, each is seized by a force beyond himself. So the striking image elevates intuition, the theamania, into some irrational, ecstatic, and uncontrollable urge or insight that goes above disciplined expertise and techne, and thus opens a dialectic or seeming dialectic opposition between two factors that I think still remain today somewhat unresolved. So the two authors that I picked that maybe each could be understood as exemplifying one of these poles, not in an opposition, but indeed as a harmonious and complete whole. So I want to speak about creative intuition, as we've already heard, in Jacques Maritain, and then the ontology of a work of art in Etienne de Gilson. In Jacques Maritain's theory of art, creative intuition is neither a sentiment nor a vague inspiration, but a precise act of non-conceptual knowledge, rooted in the very metaphysical structure of the soul. It originates not at the surface of the intellect, but in what he calls the single root of the soul's powers, a centerbird within the spiritual unconscious, which is distinct from the Freudian unconscious, where intellect, imagination, sensation, desire, and love somewhat converge in a pre-reflective way. This spiritual unconscious designates the deepest pre-rational interiority of the soul, a preconceptual ground where the human subject does not think its existence, but experiences its existence in a dark, ineffable act. The level of self-awareness inaccessible to discursive reasoning is where the soul apprehends itself not through essence, but through a bare, silent grasp of its own act of existing, revealing a dimension of subjectivity that is at once intimate and impersonal. It is in this zone where the soul, emptied of notions and memories, enters into the night of metaphysical silence. The natural mysticism becomes possible, sort of a negative contact with the absolute, not by conceptualizing God as an object, but by touching the radiance of divine being reflected in the mirror of one's own existence. The spiritual unconscious, thus, is not a void of ignorance, but a luminous depth, where human existence in its pure actuality becomes the site of an indirect, improperly immediate communion with the source of all being. In order for us to understand the source and the status of this intuition, we must reference the first striking source of Maritain's aesthetic theory as Thomas Aquinas, more precisely his elaboration of the emanation of the soul's powers. As the soul comes into existence, its various faculties, intellect, imagination, sense, flow from its essence in a fixed order of natural priority. The more perfect powers, such as the intellect, emanate first and mediate the existence and operation of the less perfect ones. Maritain writes, in this ontological procession, one power or faculty proceeds from the essence of the soul through the medium or instrumentality of another, which emanates beforehand. Thus, imagination flows from the soul through the intellect and the senses through imagination. This metaphysical layering ensures that even the lower faculties are ontologically subordinate to the intellect, which is itself ordered to being and truth. So creative intuition emerges in the soul where it is free from the workings of rational knowledge and the disciplines of logical thought. In the free life of the intellect operating within the spiritual unconscious, the soul can attain an act of knowledge that is not mediated by concept, definition, or logic, but rather a fully formed act of encounter. Crucially, Maritain insists that such intuition arises from the totality of man, quote, sense, imagination, intellect, love, desire, instinct, blood, and spirit together, end quote. This entails not a poetic exaggeration, but a metaphysical claim. Because all the faculties of the soul flow from a single essence, they're not simply juxtaposed, but interiorly united, where they are, quote, all are within the intellect, stirred and activated by the light of the illuminating intellect, end quote. What is striking to me is that the heart of Maritain's insights here reflect at least two crucial features of Thomistic metaphysics. Number one, that the essence of man underlies and unites all of his faculties. We can truly speak of human nature. And second, that the act of being, so the actus essendi, is the innermost dynamism of all reality, including essence, as the actualitas omnium actum, the actuality of all actualities, and as Thomas calls it, the perfection of all perfections. This Thomistic insight allows us to understand being not as a static property, but a pure act, spuros, a self-diffusive, irreducible, and foundational act. Maritain's existential meditation echoes this Thomistic intensive metaphysical structure by situating mystical self-awareness not in an intuition of essence, so its own nature, but rather the non-conceptual contact with being, which is also then the bridge to the nature that the artist observes in order to bring artistic form into the material manifestation. So this aligns with the Aquinas' doctrine that all created beings receive their being as an act that perfects their essence, which is in potency to it. The essence limits and receives the act, but the being itself flows from God, the ipsum esse subsistens, the pure subsisting act. Art then, in its highest vocation, mirrors the mystery of creation itself. Just as the creator calls the cosmos into being through a pure act of will, breathing unity, order, beauty, and intelligibility into that which was once nothing, the artist too draws forth from the depth of interior silence something never before seen. The work of art is a created and creative participation in the being of the poet and painter. It bears the imprints of the artist's soul, transfigured through imagination into tangible form. So true, meaningful art thus originates in the hidden ontological center of man, where the soul contacts its own being. Creative intuition, then, is not a merely poetic phenomenon of avant-garde boundary breaking, but a metaphysical endeavor, mirroring the ground of existence itself. What emerges through the artist is not only a form, but a silent testimony to the act by which being is given and was given to himself. This gives the most robust foundation of creative intuition, and in fact of divine inspired intuition in general, and reminds us of how aesthetic beauty in itself, is always linked to a metaphysical understanding of the person. Moving to Etienne Gilson, I want to focus on art as the cognition, of being. So not the artist cognizing himself first, but in fact cognizing a thing, an object, in fact, a form that wants to bestow upon reality. Standing as a harmonious counterpoint to Maritain's focus on the artist's individual meditative intuition, Etienne Gilson emphasizes the ontological significance of the work of art itself and the skillful mastery of the craft which is necessary to realize it. Where Maritain excavates the interior dynamism of the artist's soul and the operation of creative intuition, Gilson turns outwardly towards the reality of the work and working skill itself, technique. For Gilson, art is a metaphysical act, a true action, not conceptual but real, through which being manifests itself. The key, I think, to understanding Gilson's philosophy of art lies equally in his fidelity to Aquinas' doctrine as the essay of all acts, in his extension of the doctrine, and in his extension of his doctrine to the order of making, the ratio factibilium that we just heard about. The artist is not primarily a subject expressing himself, but a craftsman who bestows being, form, upon matter. Gilson departs from modern aesthetics in a radical yet precise way. Art is not the expression of thought, it is the production of a thing, a being in the full metaphysical sense. Quote, a painting is not a thought, it is a thing made visible. End quote. He also rejects the Kantian bifurcation between knowing and making, reviving instead the classical cognitio factiva, the knowledge expressed in and through making. Artistic knowledge is not speculative, but productive. It culminates not in a concept, but in a form instantiated in matter. Gilson reminds us that the objective ground of beauty lies in the splendor of being as known, echoing the Thomistic axiom pulchrum est splendor veritatis. Artistic creation is not imitation of nature, nor expression of feeling only, but the production of a form that enables being to shine forth in matter. Thus, the artist is a metaphysical agent, not a dreamer, not an analyst, but one who causes being to appear under the mode of the beautiful. And in that, I think calling him the messenger of beauty is already the perfect nomenclature. This metaphysical independence of the artwork sets Gilson decisively apart from both romantic subjectivism and postmodern constructivism. Against the romantic impulse to reduce art to a projection of interior emotion, and against the postmodern tendency to dissolve it into cultural semiotics or linguistic play, Gilson insists that art is a metaphysical act, a real engagement with being, neither an expression of the self only, nor a fruit of a social construction only. The work of art is a forged presence. In the act of creating, the artist participates analogously in the fecundity of esse in creation, that fundamental act of existence which is the very core of reality, already mentioned. While the artist does not create being ex nihilo, as God does, he nonetheless imposes intelligibility upon matter through form, drawing out from potentiality a new actuality, and in doing so, allows being to be seen anew under a fresh aspect, if you will. The artwork is conceived as a metaphysical synthesis where matter and form are unified in a singular instance of beauty, disclosing the splendor of beauty itself. In this light, art assumes a quasi-sacramental dimension, an incarnate sign that reveals the radiance of truth through form. I want to touch on something that we have not spoken about yet, which is the problem of art without belief. Because having established the foundational contributions of Maritain and Gilson and Thomas and Aristotle, I think it becomes necessary to confront a pressing issue. It's not just a contemporary issue, it's a timeless question, but nonetheless it is one of contemporary relevance. What of the artist who does not share this metaphysical conviction? What of the artist that does not believe in God? In short, can an artist who denies God, who denies transcendent beauty, create something beautiful? I would say yes, but maybe not in the way that the question presumes. Point one, I would say that beauty depends on being and not belief. So the artist's belief or unbelief does not change the metaphysical structure of form and of being. Beauty is not a subjective projection, nor the result of an ideology. It is an objective reality grounded in form and being. So a work of art may radiate beauty in virtue of its formal integrity, unity, and radiance, even if the maker consciously or subconsciously rejects the source of all of these qualities. In essence, beauty is ontologically anterior to belief. The painting, sculpture, poem, or musical composition does not require the artist's assent to metaphysical truth in order to participate in that truth. Like the scientist who discovers gravitational laws, without necessarily confessing a divine order of the cosmos, the artist can manifest beauty without meaning and without naming its cause. Point 2. Intuition of form is already intuition of being. Many artists, probably most artists, don't really think about the work of art as a work of being. They think about it as something that they have to mold, material things that they bestow form onto. But when the artist shapes matter into form that moves the soul, his own and the soul of others, he does more than arrange elements. He responds to the ontological structure of reality. So, in Thomistic terms, form is the principle of a being's intelligibility. To apprehend form, even tacitly, is already a touch from a being. This intuition is not discursive, it is a co-natural grasp of order, unity, and radiance, what Aquinas identifies as the marks of beauty. So even if the artist calls it inspiration, or chance, or creativity, what he participates in is his cognitio factiva, so the making that is tied to the form of the thing he's making and his own. So even the unbelieving artist, by rightly intuiting beautiful form, unknowingly communicates with that form and thus with the beautiful. And I mean, a good example of that is also that many artists may not comprehend the full extent to the beauty and to the form that they have realized in their art, whereas an onlooker may get more out of the artwork than the artist himself. And thirdly, the third response perhaps is the most humbling. It's not the artist who gives power its beauty, but beauty that testifies despite the artist. So the artist then becomes really the prophet of the beautiful, and Elliott's word here. It is not the artist who grants beauty its power, but beauty that discloses itself through the work, often despite the artist's disbelief or denial. Many of the greatest works of modernity, marked by existential doubt, silence, or even despair, nonetheless radiate order, mystery, form, and ultimately beauty. They stir the soul because they carry with them the mark of being. In Thomistic terms, pulchrum is not reducible to subjective confession, but it is the splendor formae super partis materia, the splendor of form shining forth from matter. So in conclusion, I want to say that the aesthetic philosophies of Maritain and Gilson converge upon a single metaphysical affirmation, that art is a privileged side of being's and beauty's self-disclosure. It is not the product of fantasy or plaything of culture, but a serious act, rooted in ontology, radiant with truth, and charged with the mystery of form. When philosophy of art is unmoored from metaphysical foundations, when beauty is relativized and art instrumentalized, their Thomistic vision stands at a quiet defiance. It reminds us that every act of true artistic creation is an analogy of the act of being, that primal act by which all things are and shine. Art, properly understood, becomes a metaphysical threshold, a luminous passage through which the real breaks into appearance. And the artist, far from being a romantic solitary or a cultural technician, is revealed as a contemplative maker, a steward of form, a mediator of being. In fidelity to being, he bears witness to what is, by shaping what appears. And in doing so, he restores to beauty its dignity, not as a pleasure, but as a splendor, not as a sentiment, but as truth made visible. Thank you very much.